I'm pleased to welcome all of you this morning to our inaugural Jim Hayes Symposium dedicated to advancing integrity in journalism and communication. Once again, I'm Mary Glick, and I'm pleased to be with you today. Integrity. The American Heritage Dictionary defines it as steadfast adherence to a strict moral or ethical code, the state of being unimpaired, complete, the quality or condition of being whole or undivided. If you turn to Roget's thesaurus, and you'll unearth some synonyms like honesty, virtue, righteousness, goodness, decency, and honor. It's hard to believe that it was less than a year ago when the Journalism Department's advisory board was looking for a way to honor a beloved professor and mentor, that the idea for the Jim Hayes Symposium was born. A small working group of the advisory board members has been planning for months to make today possible. A few of them had the opportunity to let Jim know what we were up to before he passed away in June, and we were happy to receive his blessing and the support of his family. We're pleased that several of the family members will be with us today, and more will join us for tonight's dinner. On today's program, we have 5 distinguished communications professionals who will share with us their experiences and observations around the topic of integrity. One of Cal Poly's noted philosophy professors will send us home with his take on the topic and on the day. In between, we plan to engage all of you in a conversation about integrity and what it means in your life. These are interesting times to make a living in communication. We live in a world of content and brands. The lines between information and entertainment continue to blur. The press in America is losing its economic base, and anyone with a cell phone can capture an event in real time, tweet about it, and call herself a journalist. The purpose of today's symposium is to promote the journalistic practices that produce trustworthy and responsible reporting, and to bring together students, educators, journalists, communications professionals, and the public to address current challenges to ethical communication. Our goal, to inspire a new generation to lead with integrity. I'd like to thank the sponsors who came forward and recognized the value of this goal by supporting the symposium, the Journalism Department, and the legacy of Jim Hayes. The first to offer financial support was Cal Poly's Agricultural Education and Communication Department, a partner with our department, Journalism, in the Brock Center for Agricultural Communication. Many graduates from our program weren't aware of Jim Hayes' affection and connection with the Brock Center and his role in the founding of the center. So I'm really pleased to have with us today the director of the Brock Center, Megan Silcott, who will talk a little bit about Jim's vision for the center.
Okay, I'll come to that. Oh.
Yep,
Good morning. Thank you, Mary. Jim Brock was a Cal Poly agricultural alumnus and a former leader in the Western vegetable industry. His desire to enhance the image of the agriculture industry has led to the expansion of undergraduate education opportunities at Cal Poly, and especially in agricultural communication. The Brock Center was established through the generosity of Jim Brock and his wife, Martha. Their lifelong commitment to agriculture will be continued through this center. It's a joint center of the College of Liberal Arts and College of Agriculture, Food, and Environmental Sciences. It is one answer to the expressed need of the agriculture industry for help with efforts to improve our communication with the public. Mr. Hayes was a key component in launching the Brock Center, and was he ever a storyteller? Jennifer Ray, the editor-in-chief of Ag Circle in 2012, joined Mr. Hayes and I for lunch that December. He told history of how the center was transformed. He shared life nuggets with us, and of course offered advice and guidance to continue efforts in reestablishing the Brock Center Advisory Council and moving our mission and goals forward with various projects. From a Nicaraguan restaurant and how it came to be, to naming top editors and colleagues of his he would suggest us to contact, Mr. Hayes spoke with care and sincerity. That lunch meeting, by the way, was set up entirely via Facebook messages. At one point, he said, "You're not recording this, are you? Stop, stop." As he continued to tell about misadventures in Atwater, the crops different towns were known for during his reporting days, and what it was like to come across a school bus accident, and the ethics of reporting it or not. Mr. Hayes was the founding director for the Brock Center for Agricultural Communication. He said over that lunch, "One of the things that concerns me is the dichotomy between public relations and traditional journalism. The fact that PR people by nature are activists, and they are promoting a point of view. And traditionally, newspaper people were so uncomfortable with that kind of position, they would not tell people what political party they belonged to. A lot of that has faded, but they used to be very objective and try to be and print both sides, not just one." Mr. Brock, Jim, was very much an activist and would have applauded the advocacy group, I Love Farmers, They Feed My Soul, and their efforts to promote American farmers and ranchers. He wanted me to be more activist, and I was on the other side of the fence and wanted to be more objective in covering agricultural issues. Most of the time I spent during several years of running the Brock Center was involving food safety because it was an issue we could both agree on. Mr. Hayes went on to talk with great understanding of today's agriculture versus how agriculture topics were covered in the late 80s. He was dear friends with both Jim and Marty Brock and valued their friendship. His tenure as a leader and teacher brought his students' children into his classroom over the decades. He also recalled Richard Gearhart falling asleep outside his office when Richard was a student here at Cal Poly. Mr. Hayes gave today's Brock Center the following advice to fulfill. One is relations with the industry. That's paramount, he said. A center that is truly useful has outreach. It goes beyond the academic reach to a broader community, and it should have an impact. His second comment was that academic research needs to be meaningful, covering food and safety, and the dissemination of agriculture information to the public remains a goal of today's Brock Center. Thirdly, he said it ought to have a big footprint, publicize itself. I'll share one final statement from that lunch meeting that taught me more than I could have dreamed in a short period of time. Very fitting to today's purpose and the celebration of the inaugural event, Mr. Hayes said,
Moved for one. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think the center could have a role as a bridge.
Sure.
And elicit, if it was careful, not by dancing a thin line, but rather by establishing honest positions and being open to, every time you hold a conference, it's an opportunity to get people who don't like each other to sit down at the same table and accomplish something. If you do nothing but preach to the choir all the time, what's the point? You're not going to get outside.
I'm going to read it one more time. The center could have a role as a bridge and elicit if it was careful, not by dancing a line, but rather establishing honest positions and being open. Every time you hold a conference, it's an opportunity to get people who don't like each other to sit down at the same table and accomplish something. If you do nothing but preach to the choir all the time, what's the point? You're not going to get outside. Thank you, Mr. Jim Hayes.
Thank you, Megan. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Jim's daughter, Dayle Hayes. Dayle is a registered dietitian and a blogger who advocates for healthy kids, schools, and communities, and she's here representing the family this morning.
I live in Montana, So I thought it particularly appropriate to start my remarks with the first sentence of A River Runs Through It. In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. And although my father loved fly fishing, I would have to say that in our family, there was no clear line between religion and words. When I thought about what to say here, I realized who I would be speaking to. Many of you saw my comments during my father's illness on Facebook. I labored long and hard over some of those posts, realizing that people like Peter King and Peter Hartlaub and David Curley would be reading them. So they were carefully edited. However, I didn't learn to write or to edit or to care about agriculture or what people eat by taking a class with Jim Hayes. I learned it by sitting around in living rooms and on porches and taking trips and doing things with him. Many times people have said to me, "Oh, how did you learn to write?" And I said, I didn't learn it. I was blessed with some genes. And I clearly think that a lot of what all of us, his 5 children and his 5 grandchildren, do in their daily lives has to do both with the genes we were blessed with and the opportunity to consider words very, very carefully. One of the reasons why I was excited to come today is that the agenda included the word vomitus. I thought I can't go wrong when vomitus is the title of one of the presentations. So I'm looking very much forward to hearing what Peter has to say about that. But in our family, not only was there no clear line between religion and words, words were the foundation for many things that we did. To this day, in our family, Scrabble is a blood sport. You need to be very careful about the words you use, and winners are highly prized. So I think the thing that really I want to say today is to share my gratitude to Cal Poly and to all of you who shared so much. Yes, it was difficult sometimes when our father was in hospice care to have lots of people come over, but in the end, that was also some of the best times that we had. The words you shared, the glasses of red wine, the occasional Irish whiskey, all helped us in that process. And I was thinking about words as well, remembering the Reverend Caro from St. Benedict's Episcopal Church in Los Osos, who provided our father with some of the spiritual nourishment that he needed during those last days. And one time when she came over, and it was a particularly difficult time, I left them with a glass of wine and came back a little while to check on how things were going, and they were having a passionate discussion about the differences between depression and doldrums, which included a number of both biblical and literary references. So words have been so important to all of us for so long. I have to tell you that when Peter King was the only person I shared that I was going to use the Norman Maclean opening, and he said, "Oh, the last paragraph of that is some of the finest writing ever." And I think what Dad taught us to appreciate was fine writing, wherever it was and wherever it came, in the beginning or the end of things. I wasn't sure I could get through that last paragraph, so instead I chose something which in the end may be more difficult. But when my father turned 80, the family made him a book. It involved a picture of him wearing his sailor's uniform on the front. There was some discussion with my brother Jason as to whether I could wear that hat here this morning. We decided no, but perhaps tonight at dinner. But we thought very carefully about the words. All of us contributed. We all had a page. We wrote things on it. But it is what's on the cover now that I'd like to read to you, with any luck, because I think it's another incredibly elegant piece of writing. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. In or out of them, it doesn't matter. Nothing seems to really matter. That's the charm of it. Whether you get away or whether you don't, whether you arrive at your destination or whether you reach somewhere else, or whether you never get anywhere at all, you're always busy. And you never do anything in particular, and when you've done it, there's always something else to do. Kenneth Grahame, The Wind in the Willows. Thank you so much for having today in my father's honor, and I will be here to listen to many wonderful words. Thank you.
Thank you, Dayle. Kevin Riggs is an award-winning television journalist and political reporter who has covered some of the biggest news stories of our time: the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, the school shooting in Columbine, and the hanging chads of Florida's contested presidential voting. We're proud to call him a graduate of Cal Poly's journalism department and a member of our advisory board. Kevin's current title is Senior Vice President for Randle Communications, one of California's most noted public relations firms, and he had a hand in inviting many of our speakers today. I'm happy to turn over the stage now to Kevin as the moderator of this inaugural Jim Hayes Symposium.
Thank you, Mary, for that introduction, and a sincere thanks to all of you for being here today for this inaugural Jim Hayes Symposium. You know, as Mary alluded to, when we first started talking about organizing this event last year, we obviously all loved the idea of really promoting the standards of excellence that Jim Hayes both believed in and insisted that his students adhere to, sometimes at any cost. Jim Hayes was a craftsman when it came to the written word and to journalism, but he also had a remarkable ability to reach students, to inspire and to illuminate. And that certainly was true not only when you were in his classroom, but for years afterwards. So our goal here today is to just do that: inspire and illuminate with our fine group of speakers that we have. And so with that, I'm pleased to kick off this morning's program with our first speaker of the morning. I'd like to introduce Peter King. Now, Pete's the kind of guy, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit, but he's the kind of guy that was a bit of a legend to those of us who were journalism students at Cal Poly in the mid to late 70s, because he had such raw talent that he really established his journalistic reputation, his bona fides, early on. He was known early on, among other things, for his stellar reporting of a notorious case in the Central Valley in which a school bus full of children from Chowchilla was kidnapped and held for ransom. Following that, Pete had a remarkable career in daily newspapers. He was with the Los Angeles Times for a quarter century. His columns were a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Pete now has a demanding job as Director of Communications for University of California President Janet Napolitano. I always find it a treat to talk to Pete, and I know you will too. Please join me in welcoming Peter King.
Thanks for that, Kevin. It's good to know that hyperbole is not a lost art. Here at the Harvard of the West, listening to Kevin, I was reminded of being out in Wyoming once interviewing the first cowboy to be a Marlboro Man, to be cast in that famous commercial series. He was a friend of my father's, which is how I got the in, and did an interview about his exploits and as a cowboy and as a Marlboro Man, and I said it'd be great if we could get a picture from one of the magazines and you could sign it for my dad. Remembering this story, I've just now remembered that this is about ethics, so forget about that. But anyway, He's flipping through, he's a real droll guy, flips through the magazine. Lo and behold, look, or whatever it was here, there he was, and staring off the page, and the sweat-stained Stetson, and the fierce blue eyes, and the mustache, and the trademark red shirt that he wore, holding a cigarette. And he looked at that picture of himself looking off the page. He says, "Geez Louise, I wish I looked like that guy. I wish I looked like that guy Kevin was describing." As Dayle noted, the title of this is Vomitous is a Upcoming. Upcoming is a vomitous word, and other lessons learned on the road to getting it right. Originally, Mary had thought that I would speak either right before lunch or right after lunch, but when I sent in the title, I got moved to this slot. So hopefully the breakfast was light and we're doing all right. It comes from a line that Jim wrote on a classroom assignment I did as a freshman. I had used the word upcoming event in the lead of some little bulletin announcement story that we were cutting our teeth on in journalistically as writers, and it kind of cut to the core. It's a paper I kept, and I've seen it a dozen times moving from this office to that office, this home to that home, and whatnot, because I am a pack rat. But one of the perils of being a pack rat is you only find things when you're not looking for them, and you never find them when you are looking for them. So I was digging around all week trying to find this paper. I know it's out there somewhere with his elegant handwriting on it, but I couldn't, or else we'd have it up on the screen instead of that guy. But at any rate, it was like a mental tattoo, and it says a couple things that Dayle alluded to about words and Jim, and if upcoming is the bad word, then vomitous was the good word, the perfect word to blow it apart, and he had many similar lines, and as I looked through my boxes of stuff, not finding what I was looking for. So this is the first, now I was going to say first annual Jim Hayes Symposium, because they want this to go on, but as I've seen the smiles, you knew that if you ever wrote the phrase first annual in a paper for Jim, I mean, boom, right off to animal science. No offense to the Brock Center, but you were gone. But hopefully this, and it will, and we can all work to make it happen. This event, all events start like the Boston Tea Party, and then they go. And the hope and the dream that's been articulated to me is for this to become an annual event, of which this was the first, and to grow it out. And as the event grows, it will become maybe a little less personal, and that's as it should be. Jim will always be honored by having his name on it, and people like me will always be eager to come up and keep that name alive. There's probably a dozen winners of the Betty Betts Kempf Award sitting in the audience today. It's a Cal Poly Journalism Award. I think it's like for Rookie of the Year in the journalism department or something. And my running mate, God, he's gone too, the late, great Fred Volin and I, we used to, for some reason, it was like Betty Boop. That name made us laugh, and we would tell Betty Betts Kempf jokes. We were freshmen. And then, and he was mentioned by Dayle too, a few, 5 or 10 years ago through the advisory board, Peter Hartlaub took on a project to find out who all the people were whose names were on the awards that Cal Poly gives out at their annual banquet to students. And Betty Betts Kempf, it turned out, through his research, was a talented young Cal Poly product who died on I think it was either a traffic or a news helicopter crash. And I believe it was either in Central or Southern California. I apologize. But when you heard that, you sort of feel like this big. The when you know the humans behind the names. And so we don't want that to happen to Jim. And as this event grows and builds into what it ought to build into, this is this is the Harvard of the West, and this is the right place and the right venue and the right journalism department to be able to throw big and important conversations, which is what universities do. They convene conversations. So we'll keep Jim's name alive in more than name, and I really applaud Mary and everybody else involved for making this first start, and in the spirit that they did it. So that's a good thing. I've got a few notes, but so if it's ethics is sort of and integrity, which is, I don't know which sits on top of the other, is our theme. I'll just start with a couple little notes, and then I want to, in the spirit of being first, at the first, keep it a little bit, to talk about ethics, but through the lens of Jim Hayes, which I think is appropriate. Just a couple things, and there's a great lineup of speakers coming, and they got a lot of good and important stuff to say. I've seen some of the notes. I had a city editor, Jim Wilsey, who went on to be the editor of the New York Daily News and then the New York Star Ledger, which he always said is what happens when you're not paying attention. But Jim had a great line about ethics, which I've used all my life, and that is when a question comes up and you feel like you have to ask the question, then you already know the answer, which I find is useful and interesting because it often turns out that way. You sort of know the answer before you ask. And then Jim, in freshman class, he would say, journalistically, if you lie once, you're a liar. And that always stuck with me. There's no mulligan. I don't think he did mulligans when he golfed either, but there's no mulligan in fibbing. And of course, there's lies of omission and there's lies of commission, and we're going to talk about that. The ethic I really want to talk about in the context of Jim today is the work ethic, which fits under the umbrella. Maybe part of its body's hanging out, but it's in there. Because when I think about Jim in journalism, that's more than anything what comes to mind is he worked at it, and he worked at it all his life. I dig in my quest for the vomitous line. I found the memoir stories he was writing up until he got sick of trying to put in the New Yorker. Well crafted, beautiful. It would do well against Norman McLean, Dayle. Just beautiful. He worked at it, and it breaks down into four parts about how the work sort of evolves. And Dayle was right. It begins with the words. Vomitous, perfect word to blow up upcoming. There are other words that to this day I feel I can't use. Recent. What did recent mean? Area. Area was like a no-fly zone for anybody writing anything that Jim Hayes was going to read behind. Just lazy words. The word. What's some of the others? The word local. He says it has no meaning. There is a right word. Go find it. That takes work. But if you don't get the right word out of the box, everything else just fades away. Speaking of local, so I've been spending some time at Stanford, and they have this fancy food mall at the Stanford Mall, a food store. That's all the kind of, neat stuff. Kale salads and kiwi this and that, and they have all these bins outside, and like a farmer's market, and it says local grown. God, I'm buying straight, farm to fork to food hole. And this is good stuff. I'm buying local. I'm feeling real good about this local food. Well, I've been around a little bit, and I look, they have a sign about where it comes from here at Stanford. I'm thinking Los Altos or someplace. It's Fresno, my hometown Fresno. Well, local, but technically, if you draw a 250-mile line, anything under that's not delivered more than 250 miles qualifies as local. So Fresno's got it made. They are now the corporate capital of California agriculture is now also Farmer John, going farm to fork on you. So it's an example only of words do matter, and there are always better words and the right word, but there are few right words. And one thing Jim worked at, and Dayle said it better than I, was a life of trying to find the right word. I mean, we would spend coffee shop hour after hour debating whether or not anything beyond the Big Bang was unprecedented. You know, if you break the word down, there's a precedent there, and things sort of evolved out of it. I've never, another story, Jim. Seems like everything happened in my freshman year, but, and I think it might have been sophomore. He came in one day and, without warning, because he was mad because we were writing like freshmen, and he kicked the chair and it went flying across the room. And he said, "Well, what did you just see? And we said, "Well, you're angry. You kicked the chair." And then, no, you went on for some time with a lot of imprecise descriptions of what had happened. And I remember a kid, a classmate from the Philippines, said, "Well, you kicked it soccer style with your right foot." And he said, "That's right. You got it right. You got the right description, the right words." So it was getting the words right was where we began. And I do think it was a religion for Jim in a sense, and a lesson for anybody who wants to communicate, whether it's on 140 characters or 140 pages. The second block would be facts. They titled the book, you've seen it, See Me. See Me was, you would get an A or a B and then a /F. And then he would write See Me, and you go see him. And the F was for misspelling a proper noun or getting an essential fact wrong. The dreaded See Me, many of them. And he had some, I worked with him in an early morning. I would go into the Telegram Tribune, this is about when I was a sophomore. He wrote a magazine called Focus, and if I was a good boy, I'd get to write some of the little briefs and notices of, this dancer is coming to town, or this guy learned how to play guitar and he wants you to come listen, whatever. And here's where you call to get tickets. He had a rule that if you're going to put a phone number in my publication, my magazine, then you better call it first and make sure that the person answers and that it works. You had to get that right. You had to spell the names correctly. You had to make it in the modern version today. And how many times do you see it not happen? Is people will put links up in the news releases or stories, and they don't work. They didn't. Check the links has become the modern version of make sure the phone number works. It's maybe a small thing, but if you lie once, you're a liar forever. If you get the phone number wrong, you're a guy or a person who gets the phone number wrong. So it's building, and it's building to something a little bigger than phone numbers and word choice. And it's just a matter of doing work. And then there's the methodology, which I put as my third box, where Jim might call it the third freight car. He was sort of it was more of a hobby than, I think the word thing was spiritual. I think his hobby was theory about writing and things and structure of stories. And, I mean, he went through a lot of them. But one of them was the freight train theory, where the lead of the story was the engine, and then you organized all the cars after them in an order that made sense, and then you kicked it out with a caboose. And another one, just to give you an example of how he worked at this stuff, was the f-stop theory, which is the story depends on how you set the f-stop, and some you draw back. I'm not a photographer, but You know, I did play one on TV once. But so he was very much into methodology. And excuse me for a minute. You know, I see a lot of familiar faces out there, and it's great. But name tags are a wonderful thing at our age. And I fear that as the next time around, we might have to go to sandwich boards just to be able to find yourself peering at people's shoulders. It's not always good. But so some of his rules on working at the methodology. He had a rule that if you're going to cover a city council or a board meeting, then it's your obligation as a reporter to try to find out what the vote is going to be in advance of the meeting, which meant calling every single council member or planning commissioner or whatnot. He says if you can get it before the meeting, then work and get it before the meeting. Don't wait until the meeting. He had, again, meeting coverage, which is a low form, but it's interesting. Always be the first one at the meeting. He had a little rule that you get there 10 minutes in advance before it begins and sit, and he had a Zen thing going then, and you clear your brain, take everything out, and sit there and clear out and be ready to see what happens in it. And so you can describe the chair being kicked in the right way. You got a clear mind to do that. One that was key to him, and I got to tell you my current position, it is a lost ethic, if you will, or form of ethics, and that is never ask a question of an interview subject if you could have found out the answer yourself in advance. You know, we have a saying, I work for the Office of the President at UC, I think Kevin mentioned, we have a saying, if we got something really, really bad, ooh, man, this report, we're going to take a blow on this. What are we going to do? He said, let's put it up on the website. It's where no one ever goes to look. So if you want to hide anything in your life, you got any dirty laundry, give it to me and I'll put it up on the UCOP website and you're safe. Now, we get calls from folks who, you know, just it's basic questions that they clearly had never encountered a Jim Hayes in their life. But that was one of his biggies. I mean, he introduced me to the idea of if you're going to do a story on nuclear power, well, there are a lot of books written about nuclear power. And you're coming in as a journalist, shouldn't you read some of those books before you go do the story? So if you don't know what has been written about a topic before you write about it, don't you run the risk of making yourself look a little bit foolish and dragging down the conversation rather than pushing it forward? But boy, that took work. And he did it. I watched him. He practiced what he preached in terms of putting the work in on everything he did. And I don't think it's in the genes. Maybe it is. But I do think it was in his bones. He brought the work ethic. You know, the work ethic was what I think about when I think of Jim. And I'll get to in rewriting. I've got time. I learned the most about writing with one story about a person who was building a boat in their backyard. I did it on a summer assignment for the Fresno Bee as a freelancer, but I think between my freshman and sophomore years. And Jim took me under wing with that story. And he didn't give me the answers, but he sent me back. I'm not overestimating to say that story got rewritten 10 or 15 times. And in our personal lore, it became the story of the person who tried to build a 60-foot boat in his 40-foot backyard. But I think that was conflating another story, but it kept us amused. But he was big on writing and writing and writing until you get it right. And to Sandy and some of the others, this is going to seem like a luxury that can no longer be afforded in the hustle bustle of the tweet era. But I'll get to that in a second. To end the boat story, it did get published in the Fresno Bee after all of our loving rewrites, and at the last minute, some hack took the lead and rewrote it and made it terrible. But you know, so that's newspaper. But all this words and methodology and facts, this all stack has to lead somewhere important, and it does. And it goes to the heart of what we all do and have done, and the importance of conferences like these and the importance of journalism. And it's about getting to the truth. To get to the truth takes the right word, not the lazy word. To get to the truth takes assembling the right facts, not the wrong facts. To get to the truth means positioning your brain and clearing your brain and watching with eyes that are fresh and interested, and being curious at every turn. In the end, it's the truth. And there's nothing harder. I think it's the book of Jeremiah or one of the Old Testament. And nobody knows the heart of man. We're trying to find out what the truth is, and it is not easy. It's not rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. And that, when you add in Jim and his work ethic and all that stuff, it wasn't about getting that one story done to move on to the next. It was trying to get to the truth. And that's a word that can be devalued by overuse and by pretension, but the honest truth of an event, of a moment, of a situation. All these other things are tools to get you to that quest, and it does take a lot of work. It's about avoiding the tyranny of he said, she said, which I understand can be a thin disguise for, thinly disguises objectivity, but objectivity doesn't necessarily equal truth. And there is a tyranny of he said, she said that is out there in the ether, and it bedeviled Jim. He knew it wasn't good enough to say one side says this and the other side says that. Have a nice day. He did a series of stories, and Sandy Dewar, the Telegram Tribune, or the Tribune, was kind enough to dig it out for us, and we got to burn a copy for the Hayes family, because it also includes the story about him hitting a hole in one in Idaho. So that's a good little package. But it published the fall of my freshman year. People like Mark Clicker had been there a year in advance, and it was for that paper, for any paper, it was a very ambitious undertaking. I've got printouts here, but it was basically there was a huge fight going on in San Luis Obispo County, and California over Diablo Canyon, the nuclear power plant just down the road, and he was dispatched to find out, is this thing safe? What will happen if there's an accident? Very big, basic questions that a newspaper is assigned in society to answer or to pursue. You know, what is the truth? And I read it, a couple times, and it's since I got the CDs, and it's classic Jim Hayes writing. Lots of right words stacked in just the right order, but it frustrated him. And we talked about it for years. He would go back to that series and say, I couldn't get there. I would talk to these people, these concerned opponents of nuclear power, the people worried about safety, the people who worried about evacuation routes, and this is all, and the Hosgary fault running underneath it, and they make all this sense. And then I go to talk to the folks at PG&E and the nuclear scientists, and there are all these guys in their white short sleeve shirts and the skinny black ties, and right out of the right stuff, and they're smart and they're capable and they're caring, and they say a completely different story. And by failure, he showed what the quest was, what the Holy Grail was, and failure I use as advisedly. He did a great series, but in his mind, he didn't find the truth. He had to settle for, he said. So that getting to the truth is a lot of hard work. And to sum it up, my point would be that what you're doing, beginning with the first word on the page to the last word of the 11-part series, asking a question that's almost impossible to get to the answer, involves work. And that's work is what Jim was about, and he was about it because he wanted to know the truth. And I'll end on just a couple notes. What fired him in his quest, what kept him going, what his caffeine in the quest for the truth and the quest for the right word, was curiosity. Jim has been and will be and ought to be described as a teacher, and he was terrific, but he was much less a teacher than he was a student. And he was a student all his life. And, you know, Polly, we like to say, learn by doing. He was live by learning. And he would have, it didn't have to be about journalism. If you went off and became a prison guard, and you would come to visit him, and he would drill down on what is it like to be a prison guard in a place like Corcoran or whatnot. And he'd come away with answers, and he would share them with everybody. But he was really genuinely curious. As the preacher at his service in her eulogies, and Dayle told the story about grappling around, but he had other questions for her. And he would sit in the front of his church, and he would engage people as they came in. And he wasn't doing it to make small talk. Every conversation, every encounter, every human engagement was an opportunity for Jim to find some more truth and to drill down a little bit and to find out what's going on, why it matters, all those sorts of W questions that we're supposed to. He lived it, and he worked at it. And I often thought he was being a little playful with his curiosity. It was almost like he knew that this was the tool. This was a central tool in his toolbox, and he would find any experience, any chance to sharpen that tool. Whether he's standing in line with the grocery and trying to find out the story, and he would write about it, of the person behind him at Christmas time. I remember he wrote a delightful column in the Morro Bay paper about that, on golf, where he would always play with random foursomes, because he would have there's 3 people I can drill down on. I can learn a little bit. He's keeping that tool sharp, and he would come back with some doozies. So Jim was a pre-spell check. It's been mentioned, the dictionary. It's been mentioned. He was a big believer in dictionaries. He had a theory that if you're writing a story, you should make the reader go to the dictionary themselves 3 times. Bigger the dictionary, the better the dictionary. And he was definitely pre-spell check. So when I was typing up my notes for this little talk, I kept trying to write the word vomitus. I kept getting, that little red line that the person on the other side of the screen is there putting a red line on it. I go, damn, I know he spelled it O-U-S. And so I went to a dictionary, Hayes trained, and my New American Dictionary, no such word as vomitus with a O-U-S. I went to Webster's, couldn't find it. It was all just T-U-S. I go, wow, I got him, finally. See me. If only, right? If only. But again, following the ethic of work and the pursuit for the right word and the truth that Jim embodied, I went to the mothership, and there, sure enough, there in the Oxford English Dictionary is the word vomitus with an O-U-S. It's an American coinage in a sense, and it cites only 2 references of its usage, one a 1950s novel and another a 1976 Publishers Weekly piece, which postdated Jim's use of the term, so he belongs in that stack. And that's all. And for the Oxford English Dictionary, that's huge, to only have 2 references of the usage of a word. So, bottom line, the easy way, my spell check was wrong. The hard way, the Jim Hayes way, that was the right way. And I think there's a lesson in that. Thank you. Thank you.
Pete, stay with us just for a moment. You're not done.
All right.
Appreciate the remarks. Just a couple of quick questions for you. You talked about the Hayes way and the fact that there are no shortcuts. And we all know that with the digital space and with the internet, journalists have always had deadlines, but those deadlines are even more punishing now than they were then. So what advice Especially, what have you seen firsthand in your current job with regard to journalists who are trying to take shortcuts because of this need to file for the internet, to file for social media? What advice would you give journalists about trying to maintain the accuracy while also dealing with this much more punishing series of deadlines they now face?
Well, yeah, and that's a good question, a tough reality question. I'm mindful of the Civil War general, firstus with the mostest. And I've always been of the view that firstus was overrated, that mostest was the trump card. And when it came to trying to be an agent of truth or whatnot, there are pressures there are even greater pressures than speed and brevity, which means a whole lot of bad things in terms of the sort of stuff we were talking about. There are worse enemies. Worse enemies are editors who think you should find out what is going to get the most hits and then go write about that, which I think is a very upside down way of thinking. So I think the journalists in the trade today are in a fight for time, in a fight for getting it right, in a fight for finding other ways to get it right. Remember that, Jim Hayes was social media before there was the term, and before the tools to support it. But all he did was build networks of people and pass around their information. But he was savvy on Facebook, and as has been mentioned, he did all that stuff, and he did it with joy. He didn't do it with that. But I don't think for an instant he surrendered his core values. I don't think for an instant he would put up a sloppy word on a Facebook post or a fact that he didn't know was a fact. So I don't think the need to adapt to new tools doesn't trump the need to preserve some of the old tools, like getting the words right, getting the facts right, the methodology of gathering, and most importantly, the pursuit of the truth. So that will sound like a cop-out to someone whose editor is breathing down their neck about why haven't you tweeted out of the trial yet. But there were inconveniences in the pursuit of truth when it was just about pencils and notepads.
Yeah, some things, some standards, some foundational standards really continue on despite this change that we've seen. Yeah. Peter King, thank you very much.